This is Tammy. She's from the Cornell Extension, or with Marie and Marie. I don't know if you guys are going to jump in to field some questions here. And please ask as many questions as you like. I did try to scare them as much as possible in every class. But let's give them a welcome. And if you can, just when you ask questions, if you could just ask your questions very loudly because it is being recorded, okay, so that other students may have the same question as you that will be on the LibGuide in the future. All right, so welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so we can take questions right in the middle of this. Whenever the questions hit you, just shout them out, because I want this to be as skanky as possible for you. When you start feeling freaked out and itchy, find a question and ask me, and we can stop with the ugly pictures. But of course, what would a presentation be at a college without a little test first?
I didn't study.
I'm sorry?
I didn't study. That's not
You didn't
fair.
study. Uh-oh. You're in trouble now, but I bet you you're not alone. Here we go. So, pre-workshop question number 1. Chiggers. Anybody ever hear of chiggers? Middle of the summer, get all itchy, those little red bumps. So chiggers are a big problem in many places in Suffolk County and on Long Island. How many people say yes?
Yes.
How many people say sometimes? How many people say there are no chiggers on Long Island? How many people say, what's a chigger? And how many people say only on my pets? The answer is, we've never found any chiggers on Long Island. But what we have found is lots of teeny tiny little larval Lonestar ticks. And the larvae are the first stage of the tick that hatches out of the egg. They go from larvae, then they go to nymph, and then they go to adult. The Lonestar ticks are the ones that are back here. We're going to talk about them. I'll be holding up pictures, but I'm going to pass this around. And each little speck of dust here represents a teeny tiny tick that has just hatched out of the egg. Now there are chiggers in a few places upstate. There are plenty in the south, plenty in the Midwest. But as far as we know, every time we've gone to scout and we've hunted for them, all we found are these larval Lonestar ticks. And that's what causes all these little itchy red bumps on your feet and on your legs during the summertime. Okay, pop quiz question number 2. Deet is the most effective tick repellent. Now, Deet, we know, is the most effective repellent for mosquitoes. How many people say yes? How many people say no? How many people say only when the ticks are young? How many people say only when the ticks are older? How many people say only when it's hot outside? The answer is, and most of you knew this, so that puts you a step above a lot of the audiences I have, that Deet is not the most effective tick repellent. In fact, when you examine your repellents, what you want to do is you don't want to go by the brand name. The brand name doesn't mean anything but the company that's producing it or putting their name to it. What you want to do is put on 3 pairs of reading glasses from the dollar store, stack them up on your nose, and look at that little teeny tiny print at the bottom. You'll have a chemical name, a ... and a percentage. What you're looking for in a tick repellent, and this is not a repellent, this is actually an acaricide, something that will kill the ticks, but in a repellent, you're looking for the active ingredient IR3535 or picaridin. Those 2 things are more are better tick repellents than the Deet. The Deet will do a little something, but not a lot. So beware when you're buying Cutter or Off or whatever. You always have to look at the fine print. Also, anytime that you're using a repellent, you can find out how long it's going to last by going to the Google search and typing in Rate My Repellent. What will come up is a site at the EPA, and they have all the different repellents that you can purchase listed by their EPA registration number, their trade name, which would be Cutter or Off or Deep Woods or any of the other ones. Then it will have the active ingredient. So you can actually find repellents with IR3535 and picaridin listed there, and they usually will have a column that tells you how long the repellent will last for ticks, and also how long repellents will last for mosquitoes. And that can be very, very interesting. You might be shocked to find out that what you're using really does not work very well, or you may find out that you are using something that works really well. Okay, pre-workshop question number 3. Excuse me. All ticks can give you Lyme disease. How many people say yes? How many people say no? Good. How many people say only in summer? How many people say only all adult ticks can give you Lyme disease? How many people say only all juvenile ticks can give you Lyme disease? Well, I gave it away when I said good. The answer is that no, not all ticks can give you Lyme disease. The only tick that we have, and we have 3 kinds of ticks. We have the dog tick, we have the deer or black-legged tick, and then we have the Lonestar tick over there, which is the most numerous on Long Island. The only ticks that can give you Lyme disease are these guys right here. This is the deer or the black-legged tick. Now, the other kinds of ticks can make you sick. They can carry other sorts of diseases, but not Lyme disease. Only the deer tick carries Lyme disease. And there are ticks up here for you to look at, and we even brought along a few bed bugs because they really wanted to go for a ride. They're long dead, but they're up here for you to look at. Okay, so now, pre-workshop question number 4, we only have 2 more. The best way to remove a tick is to coat it with petroleum jelly, or fingernail polish, or do like they say on the internet and take a Q-tip and go. You've all seen that video. So how many people say yes? How many people say no? How many people say only if the tick is too small to pull out? How many people say only if the tick has been feeding for longer than 24 hours? How many people say only if the nail polish is a pretty color? Okay. The answer is no. You never want to coat a tick with anything, or take a Q-tip and go, or use a flame from a match or a lighter to try to make the tick back out. If you coat the tick, what you're doing is you're blocking up its breathing holes. And the first thing that tick is going to do is what a little kid does after they've had the teacup ride one too many times down at Disney World. They're going to puke. But if they've bitten you, they've got a conduit directly into your bloodstream. So no, you never want to harass the tick. The best way to get rid of the tick is to get a pair of fine-nosed tweezers or forceps perpendicular to the tick. So if the tick is biting me here, I bring this perpendicular to the tick's body all the way up to the head, get as close to the head as I possibly can, then using my finger as a brake, I pull slowly and firmly backwards at a 45-degree angle. Ticks have backwards facing barbs on their mouth parts like a fish hook. That's why they're so difficult to remove. Now what happens if the tick's head breaks off? Well, the first thing you do is you scream like a little girl with mud on her party dress, I got a tick head in me, I tick head in me, ah! Run around the room about 25 times, and then when you finally calm down, understand that it's fairly common for the tick's head to break off. This is not a disaster, but you do want to disinfect the area right away, usually with something that's going to dry out the area, like alcohol or peroxide, and you can keep doing that, and then in a few days, the tick's head will usually drop out. What you don't want to do is to take your forceps or your fingernails, both of which have a lot of bacteria, and start digging. I have colleagues at work that even though they know better, they will start to dig, and they'll dig a hole in their skin, and that's a great way to get an infection. If you really can't stand the fact that you've got a tick head in you, go to see the doctor and let them remove it so that you don't end up with an infection of some kind. And we'll talk more about this later. Okay, last pre-workshop question, and then we'll show you some groovy tick pictures and do a little tick biology. What is the best way to kill ticks on your clothing? Because sometimes you do wander through those little tiny particles that are actually the larval ticks. How many people say the washing machine on the hot water cycle? How many people say the dryer, high heat for 1 hour? How many people say immerse the ticks in a pail of cold water? How many people say vacuum them with a brush attachment? I always picture a valley girl like, oh my God! How many people say tie up the clothes in a plastic bag for 1 week, stick it in a family member's closet who you like the least, and hope for the best? The answer is the dryer. If you put the clothes in the washing machine, they will treat it like splish splash. They will actually climb out and sit on the rim and watch the machine go round and round and round and round and round. By the way, if you decide that you are going to get revenge on the tick that you found on you by flushing it down the toilet, you don't want to do that because they can also survive that. They will climb back out, and then at 3 o'clock in the morning, when you're staggering to the bathroom going, I gotta pee, I gotta pee, they're going to be sitting on the rim going, come to me, Fanny. So wrap it up in a piece of tape, not invisible mending tape, because they can wiggle their way out of that one. but like a nice piece of duct tape or masking tape, and throw them out unless they've bitten you. If they've bitten you, then you write the date that they bit you on a plastic bag, put them in a plastic bag, get rid of the Ben & Jerry's that's been in the refrigerator or the freezer since 1983, get rid of the mystery meat, and put it in there and save it for a few weeks. And we'll talk more about that too. Okay, thus ends the pop quiz. So now, the next thing we want to know is when we have something tiny crawling on us, is it really a tick? And there are a lot of little insect-type wannabes out there. They want the fame, they want the name, but they can't do it unless they're really a tick. So what you want is you want a magnifying glass, just like Sherlock Holmes has, right? And a lighted one is very helpful. Of course, I left mine on, the battery's dead. But this kind of magnifying glass is very useful, but a smaller one is fine. Or if you're doing science, you can use a hand lens. So you need that to determine whether you actually have a tick or not. So here we have a creature. But notice, how many blue arrows do we see there? 6. Does that make it a tick or an insect? It's an insect, that's right. Ticks are more closely related to spiders. How many legs do spiders have? 8, that's right. So the first thing you can do is you can count the legs. Now under the red arrow, we have what? Antennae, that's right. Ticks don't have antennae either, never, because they're more closely related to spiders. The third thing we can do to determine whether we have a tick or an insect is we can just count body parts. How many yellow arrows, that's hard to say, do we see? 3, right. How many body parts does a spider have? 2. It has a head and an abdomen. An insect will have a head, a thorax, which is its chest, and an abdomen. So clearly we can say this is a tick or an insect? Insect, that's right. So now, what if we actually had a tick? So how many legs do we have? 8. How many body parts do we have? 2, that's right. And you can see it kind of has that spidery look to it as well. But some of the really tiny insects, it's hard to tell. Okay, so now that we've established that factor, the next thing we need to do is we need to take up our magnifying glass again. So now, this is a really, really cool trick. And what you want to do is you want to look at the rim of the tick's abdomen. See that right there? Think of that as a pie crust. Now, we're going to tell you right away how you can determine whether you have a tick that can carry Lyme disease or not just by looking at it. What do you notice about the difference between the two rims? Think about pie crust. Go for it.
That one is perforated.
It's perforated, exactly. If you've got perforations or little breaks in the rim, you don't have a tick that can give you Lyme disease. But if you have a smooth rim like this one, that is a tick that can give you Lyme disease. The other thing you want to look at is the color of the legs. Notice that for the deer tick or the black-legged tick, it has really, really dark legs compared to that. But with the rim, you can always tell the difference if you have a magnifying glass. So that's a great tip so that if in the middle of the night you find the tick, you don't have to worry that you're getting Lyme disease all night long. You can have some reassurance that at least for the tick you found, now that doesn't mean you might not have had another tick on you. For the tick that you found, you are not likely or you're not going to get Lyme disease from that. The other thing that we want to remember too is that you always want to, as I said, keep the tick and examine it in bright light. Now, another thing that we can do, well, let's have another pop quiz first. The tick closest to me, can that give you Lyme disease? No, why not? It's got, yeah, that's right, the rim is perforated. How about the tick furthest from me? Yes, that one can give you Lyme disease. Okay. So now, suppose you did have a deer tick. Right here we have the adult male. And you notice that the male deer tick is all dark. And look at his mouth parts. His mouth parts look like needle-nose pliers, if you've ever used tools like that. And we saw that he has the other requisite characteristics of being a tick. There's the female. She has a mahogany-colored abdomen, and it actually looks very orange to the naked eye, or reddish orange. But look at her mouth parts. They also look very much like needle-nose pliers. And then we've got the whole darn family. We got Papa Tick, we got mama tick, and right here, up in the corner, we have the tick that hands down is most likely to make you sick. Was there a question? Somebody have a question? No? Okay. This is the nymph. Now, normally the nymph of the deer tick is dark, but this one just hatched out, so it takes it a little time for the skeleton to harden off, and when it does, it will be completely dark. Why is this the one that's likely to give us, most likely to give us a disease, hands down? Because we're not likely to notice it. It's very, very tiny, and the saliva of the deer tick or black-legged tick is not as irritating as the saliva of the Lonestar ticks. So this one has the best chance of feeding on you for 24 hours or more, which is the amount of time that you need to transmit most tick-borne diseases. Also, deer tick nymphs are the ones that are most likely to carry most of the diseases that bother us, and we'll talk about that later. So that is our deer tick nymph, and again, there are those needle-nosed mouth parts here. I'll put this back. Now, we don't have to worry about the larvae of the deer tick. Why? Because the larvae of the deer tick do not feed on us. They would really rather have a meal on a mouse. I mean, occasionally they might, but it's not very common. And there's that nymph again with the pointy mouth parts. Okay, so what's the likelihood of encountering an adult male deer tick? Only moderate. Believe it or not, you're much more likely to encounter a dog tick or a Lonestar tick. The time of year that we can encounter these guys is now, and in fact, we could have encountered at any time the temperature was over 40 from February through June, and we'll talk about the disease potential later. There's the adult female, again, only a moderate likelihood of encountering her, and again, February to June, just in time for short season. And the disease potential we'll talk about later on. Okay. And here is the nymph, the one that's most likely to make you sick, but believe it or not, the likelihood of encountering the nymph is only low to moderate. So although they're the ones that are most likely to make you sick, they're also not as likely to be encountered as some of the other ones. And you'll see them from April to July. Again, they're not as itchy, they're really tiny, so it's easy to miss them. So one of the most important things you can do after you've been in tick territory is to do a tick check. And you have to check the back of the naughty bits too. So for that, I really recommend, if you spend a lot of time outdoors, to buy a telescoping mechanics mirror. That's the kind of mirror they use to look behind appliances and stuff. They're like $20 or $30 and not very expensive, but then you can reach over your back and you can check if you don't have somebody who can do it for you. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So again, we don't have to worry about the larvae. So now we have two other choices. We have the Lonestar tick, which is actually the most common tick we have on Long Island, and we have the good old dog tick over here, which everybody tends to kind of blow off. They say, ah, it's a dog tick, it's not going to do anything. Unfortunately, it can. Dog ticks carry Rocky Mountain spotted fever, also known as black measles. And those black measles are where you have little hemorrhages that are caused by the Rocky Mountain spotted fever organism, and it can kill you very quickly. So any tick should be treated with suspicion and with respect. So let's talk about these other kinds of ticks. So once again, back to your magnifying glass, and again, we can look at the mouth parts. We said that deer ticks or black-legged ticks have mouth parts like needle-nosed pliers. Well, if we look at the dog tick, we can see that the dog tick has mouth parts like blunt-nosed pliers. You can also tell that this is a dog tick because it's doing the Macarena, right? And it looks like an evil emperor from a video game. See the hat and the scowl and the beard and all that? Like that? So you can tell that. Yeah. Ticks have personalities too. And if we had a Lonestar tick, they have very, very easily recognizable mouth parts. They're very elongate. Also, it looks like an old-fashioned candle mold. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those, but you can certainly look that up and you'll see that that's what that looks like. So the other thing we can think about too is that the Lonestar tick is almost perfectly round versus the other two who have more of a teardrop shape. Okay, so let's see what we get if we encounter, dun dun dun. Okay, so here's what we have to choose from. We have Mama dog tick and Papa dog tick on the side closest to me. The larvae and the nymphs of the dog tick don't usually bite us. We will not encounter them. In fact, we've only seen one once in all the scouting that we've done. So we don't have to worry about them, just the adults. But for the Lonestar tick, the most numerous tick that we have the whole shooting match. We have mama tick. And these are why they're called Lonestar ticks, because they have this glitter dot right in the center of their backs. Also, let me let you look at this. You see that little hook on the end? Ticks, because they're ectoparasites, all have those little hooky things. So when a mammal wanders by, ticks like the quest, they'll climb up to about 18 inches high, which is called deer belly height. They kind of do that, whoa, and then as something walks by, they use those hooky things to hook on, and they walk very quickly upwards. People think that ticks drop on them from trees, or maybe from birds or something zooming overhead, but they don't. They just walk like crazy going upwards. That's called positive geotropism. Now, it's advantageous for them to do this because, you think about it, if you are a grazing deer or some other sort of mammal, where's the one place you can't scratch? Your head, your neck, your ears. So that's why the ticks always end up there. And if you think about it, it makes sense from the perspective of the larval Lonestar ticks when they climb on you. And larval Lonestar ticks are a little bit unusual because the larvae, after they've hatched out, hang together in a mass, and that entire mass, when you brush up against it, will get on you, and they start climbing like crazy. But they're toddlers, so they get tired easily. That's why they end up on your feet and your lower legs, because they run out of steam, and they just feed wherever they get tired. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a while. So there's Mama Lonestar tick. Here's Papa. Papa is very handsome. He's got kind of a shiny brown color to him, and he's got a very, very fancy pie crust here. And again, these two, the adults, are very likely to be encountered. And the next stage we have of the Lonestar tick is the nymph, okay? The nymph is perfectly round, and it is the size and the shape of a head of a pin. Now, they too will tend to cluster together wherever there's a bunch of rodents hanging out. So if you have a ground cover or stone wall, you're likely to have a bunch of nymphs hanging together. And in fact, if they're in the ground cover, the best thing to do is just simply to mow the ground cover, because that will cause the rodents to have no place to hide. If the nymphs don't have the rodents to feed on, they too will disperse. And this is a nice sort of a brown, light brown color. And then finally, the last life stage that happily makes a meal on us is that dust on the plastic thing that's wandering around. It's at the back table right now. This is a blow-up, which is mislabeled on the internet, but we can clearly see that this is a Lonestar tick. Look at the mouth parts, look at the notches in the rim, and you're like, hey, wait a minute, that only has 6 legs. Well, the larvae do only have 6 legs. They get their last pair of legs when they molt from larvae to nymph. But most of the time, we're not going to be counting the legs on a larvae. We're more likely to be going, oh my God, trying to get them off of us. So, and like I said, this is mislabeled on the internet, but we'll talk about that later. Okay, so this is what we have to choose from. Now, if you encountered a dog tick, there's Mama, there's Papa. We don't care about the nymphs or the larvae. They're not going to bother us. So we just have to worry about the adults. You can see the adult pictures over there. Mama's got a nice white shield on her. These are the biggest of the ticks, of the 3 kinds of ticks that we'll see. And then Papa has this kind of nice Art Deco pattern on him. And I'm sure you've all seen dog ticks, especially if you walked in the nature area over there, because that's what we were primarily seeing over there. So there's the male. There's the female. Now, what can you expect from them? The adult male dog tick, you'll see him from February to September. So you're going to see him for a good long portion of the year. And again, Rocky Mountain Spotted Fever, which we'll talk about later, is his disease potential. There's the female, again, February to September. And I should mention that for both the black-legged tick or the deer tick and the dog tick, they really don't like to be hot and dry. They need moisture. So you're most likely to encounter them right along the edge of the wood line, where there's still a little bit of shade and there's moisture being held in the leaf litter. And in fact, when they're out questing, they have to frequently go up and down and take a coffee break, sit and read the newspaper for about 15 minutes, because when they get to a certain point of dehydration, they need to burrow down and get some more moisture. Not so for the Lonestar ticks. They're more likely to be out in hot, dry environments, and actually the Lonestar ticks will follow you. So if you feel eyes on you and you feel like somebody's following you, it could be because they will follow your trail for up to 60 feet or so. So more things to worry about, right? Okay. So now, we don't have to worry about the nymphs, don't have to worry about the larvae. Now what about the Lonestar ticks? So there we go. There's mama, there's papa, there's nymph, and there's larvae. And you can see how big the larvae are compared to a penny. So you really have to watch yourself when you're out walking, and stop walking frequently and take a look to see if you've picked up a few thousand friends. So there's papa, nice and shiny brown, and there's mama with her glitter dot and her mouth parts. So what can you expect from them? Well, unfortunately, the male Lonestar tick is active from March to September. So they're out there now, so we can look for them, and the likelihood of encountering them is very high. So out of all of them, this is the one that you're likely to encounter. The female Lonestar tick, likelihood of encountering very high, March to September for the adults. And then for the nymphs, likelihood of encountering very high. When are we going to see them? March to November. And these are small, so again, it's easy to miss them. And we'll talk about the disease potential later. And then there are the larval Lonestar ticks. And those are the ones that you encounter in a bunch. So the time of year to encounter them is mostly late May to October. You might see in the literature midsummer. We found them in warm years as early as late May. I don't know about this year, but we have seen them. So the good thing about larvae is that because you are the first thing that they have fed on, they are unlikely to transmit any kind of disease to you. So that is a good thing. Otherwise, if you get an encounter with them, you're likely to be itching for about 3 weeks. When you scratch those tiny red bumps, you generally actually kill the larval Lonestar ticks, but the moment that your immune system encounters their saliva, that's when you get that bump, and that reaction takes about 3 weeks to go away. Okay, and these are what people think are chiggers. So if you watch Family Guy, you know that they talk about cankles frequently, right? That's my cankle. And you see all those red arrows with a little dot at the end? I went out to Montauk to do some carpenter bee work, and I almost came home with 10,000 new friends. My socks stayed in Montauk. They're having a great time. They send me a postcard every summer, and I was able to take some tape, which is your best friend, and get rid of most of them. So you can see how tiny they are, and this is the kind of bite that they cause. And this is what caused the confusion with people thinking they were chiggers, because the type of bite, that little raised bump with a little fluid in it, looks very much like a chigger bite. But true chiggers don't feed on blood, while tick larvae do feed on blood. A true chigger will find a spot on your skin, will spit out some enzymes. Those enzymes will actually eat a little hole in your skin, causing the proteins to dissolve and then reconfigure, so they've got a little cement feeding tube. And then the chigger can go down in like a little juice box, go and suck out all your cellular contents. And your body reacts to those reconfigured proteins, and it takes a few weeks for those to go away. Also, true chiggers don't look anything, well, a little bit. They're mite relatives, and so are actually spiders and mites and ticks are all related, but you can see that that looks very different. However, this, far away from me, we know is a larval Lonestar tick, yet on the internet, it's labeled as a chigger. So there is a lot of confusion out there. Even medical personnel might not know the difference, and they also might not know the difference between the three different kinds of ticks that you can encounter, simply because they don't work with them all the time. So you can always bring your ticks into Extension or to other places that know what ticks look like and work with ticks all the time in order to identify them. So it's sort of like the musical, look down, they're on your ankles now. And these guys are all crawling up because, of course, they're all positively geotropic. And they're trying to get to your head and neck so they can settle in for a good hot meal. Okay, so now the interesting thing, unfortunately, about the larval Lonestar ticks is that there's one other thing that they can do in conjunction with the nymphs and the adults. And that is something called alpha-gal syndrome. Now, alpha-gal syndrome is caused by a reaction of your body with the tick saliva. So if you've ever read or heard about strep throat, you know that strep throat, if it's left to go without being treated with antibiotics, eventually can result in something called rheumatic fever, which can make you very, very sick, because if you produce antibodies to strep throat, the protein on the strep throat organism is so similar to the protein on your heart that your body will actually attack your own heart, thinking that it's the strep throat organism. We have a similar sort of setup going on with tick saliva. In the case of alpha-gal syndrome, if you encounter, and this is not everybody, everybody's immune system is different, if you encounter tick saliva from the Lonestar tick, your body may produce antibodies to it, but the proteins in the saliva of the tick are so similar to the proteins on mammalian meats that when you eat a hamburger, 5 or 6 hours later, you may wake up and think, God, I don't feel so well. You go and you look at yourself in the mirror, you're like, eh, because you've got hives all over you. And you may feel sick to your stomach, or you may actually start to wheeze and have trouble breathing. And in very rare cases, you can go into almost an anaphylactic shock state, which is very dangerous. And this is because your body is reacting to mammalian meats. So this would be beef, pork, venison, lamb, or mutton, sometimes cheese, sometimes milk, and sometimes even gelatin, like Jell-O gelatin or gel caps, like on pills. Some people can get it severely enough. And sometimes, if you stop eating the meat, after a few years, you can go back and then you won't have the reaction anymore. Other people, it seems to stick with them because everybody's immune system is different, and not everybody develops this. The good news is you can eat as much chicken or turkey or fish as you want, because that doesn't have that protein. We have a fact sheet up here. You probably all know someone, perhaps, that suffers from alpha-gal, and it seems to be an increasing problem because, of course, our Lone Star populations are increasing. Now remember, too, that Lone Star populations are driven by the deer population. So as the higher the deer population gets, the more likely you are to have higher and higher Lone Star populations. In contrast, your deer tick populations are driven by rodents. And so if you're trying to clean things up in your own home environment, you want to make sure there's not good places for rodents to hang out, like with all the bird seed underneath the bird feeder, because birds are messy eaters, and the rodents are attracted to that area, and so are the ticks. And we'll talk about that. Okay, so now, we already talked about Lone Star, alpha-gal syndrome, so let's talk about tick-borne disease. And we're going to talk about the most common tick-borne diseases in the New York metropolitan area. But one thing you want to remember is that it is possible to have more than one tick-borne disease at the same time. It is possible to have those diseases from different kinds of ticks at the same time. So just because you find a tick and you have it tested, and that test comes back negative, doesn't mean one didn't feed on you and give you something and you have it from that particular tick. So keep that in mind. All right, so what have we got? Well, there are very detailed fact sheets if you go online from the CDC. Unfortunately, most of our tick-borne diseases all have the same symptoms. So it becomes very difficult to know what you have just from your symptoms. You might start out with swollen glands, or fatigue, or fever, or sore joints. Many of these will cause the same sorts of syndromes. Also, you cannot rely on the rash. We always hear about the bullseye rash with Lyme disease. Throw that one out the window, because many times you won't develop a rash with Lyme disease, or the other diseases can cause you to have a rash. So what have we got? So you can see that the deer tick gets the lion's share here of the very common diseases. They carry anaplasmosis, which is a bacterial disease. They carry babesiosis, which is probably the second most common tick-borne disease around here. That's a protozoa. So even if you go on antibiotics, or you take the antibiotics you saved from your last sinus infection and think, oh, I'm going to save some money, antibiotics aren't going to do much against the protozoa. We have Lyme's disease, which is a bacteria. And then we have a new one that's creeping up on Long Island. That's called Borrelia Miyamotoi. One of my friends just came down with that and got very, very, very sick from it. And you can see these are all carried by the deer tick, but look how many have the nymph as the prominent stage for carrying. Then we switch over to Lonestar ticks, and yes, they do carry disease. The primary one they carry is Ehrlichiosis. which is a rickettsial bacteria, a very specialized kind of bacteria. And then there's STARI, which stands for Southern Tick-Associated Rash Illness. Now, they don't test for that, as far as I know, at all up here. And that's like a very mild form of febrile disease, but again, it can happen. And then finally, the American dog tick, which carries Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which is a very serious disease and can kill you very quickly. So that's why I say, if you get bitten by a tick, immediately what you do is you seal that up, put it in the freezer, write the date that you were bitten, and then also write it in your calendar. And if you develop a febrile illness within 3 weeks of that bite, get yourself to the doctor and explain what you were bitten by, or show them what you were bitten by. Okay, so again, you can go back and look at these disease symptoms, and again, the tick has to be feeding for 24 hours or more to effectively transmit those diseases. Even if they have them, it takes a while to transmit, and even if they do transmit it, your immune system may shut it down. The single disease that takes less time that we know of is something called Powassan Virus, or deer tick virus, which was in the news a lot last year. This is a relatively rare virus, but this can be transmitted in 15 minutes, and this one can kill you very quickly. So again, if you have experienced a severe headache that you can't get rid of, plus any other symptoms, get yourself to the doctor as quickly as possible. Don't wait, especially if you know you've been bitten by a tick. And again, you can help yourself to this stuff after I'm done yakking up here. Okay, so tick-borne disease, check the CDC website, save your tick. A negative test for a disease does not necessarily mean you are in the clear, especially if it's Lyme disease. There's a couple reasons for that. Number one, the Lyme disease organism frequently changes the protein that is on the surface of the organism. The immune tests they use are based on only one protein, so the test is only as good as the protein that it was based on. So you can indeed have Lyme disease, but not have it show up on the test. Now, they've tried to compensate for that recently by doing 2 tests. So if there's some question about it, they'll go ahead and do a more specific immune test to try to catch that. So just bear that in mind. If you feel like you've been bitten by a tick, well, you know you've been bitten by a tick, and you feel that you have a tick-borne disease, but they keep saying no, 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 just keep pushing at it until you get an answer that you're comfortable with, because you're your own best health advocate. Okay, so let's see. Keeping ticks away. We already talked about how to pull them off of you and why that is. And safe tick destruction. One thing I want to remind you of is a lot of people love to crush ticks between their fingernails because it gives them a little bit of revenge. Don't do that, because remember that any disease organisms that are inside the tick, when you breach that tick, they get under your fingernails. If you pop them, they can go flying into cuts or whatever that you might have on your hands. Also, don't burn them. People are pyros. They just love to set fire to ticks. But if that tick pops, you're going to have tick guts in your eye, on the rim of your Starbucks, on the corner of your mouth. Don't do it. Wrap it up in a piece of tape. If it didn't bite you, throw it away. Okay, what else do we want to say? And of course, don't flush them down the toilet. Please don't do that. All right, so meet your new best friends, masking tape and lint roller masking tape. When you're out, going to see Grandma, like Little Red Riding Hood, carry those in the basket with you. Because if you get into a little pod of larval Lonestar ticks, you're never going to be able to sit there and pick them all off. Yet, if you swipe at them with a piece of masking tape wrapped backwards so that the sticky side is out, or the lint roller, you can just go pat, 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 and remove most of them. And even the adults can't get off that tape. And that's very satisfying, because they're lying on the tape going, and they can't get off of there, and then you can just go, ha, sucker, and fold the tape over, and you are done. Okay. So wear boots or tick gaiters, which are basically plastic-looking leg warmers, which fit over your boots and go up to your knee. You can wear your socks over your pant legs. The problem is, if you're cheap like me, and you can pull your tube socks up to the light, and you can see a lot of light through there, those tiny ticks can dart right through those gaps. They can also dart into grommets on your shoes or your boots. And by the way, if you're out walking in tick territory, make sure you carry an extra pair of shoes and socks with you to change into before you climb in your car, because otherwise, for a few weeks, those ticks are going to be lined up on your dashboard, grooving out your music, bouncing, driving, messing with your GPS. You don't want those ticks in your car. I mean, eventually the car will heat up and kill them, but you don't want to do that if you don't have to. Wear tightly woven fabrics when you're out walking, like athletic pants fabrics. You can even wear pantyhose. That's what they have the military do in the Far East, where they have a problem with a mite-borne disease called Tsutsugamushi disease. That's a very juicy word to say, and it's a lot of fun. I suggest you try it. Tsutsugamushi disease. Okay, so check yourself, check your gear, check your pets, carry a magnifying glass and masking tape with you in your basket when you go through the woods to visit Granny. And there is Marie Boulier. She is wearing this spring's latest fashion, little fashion music here. She's got the hat on, light-colored hat, light-colored clothing, solid boots, and she is carrying a tick checking flag. And you can make your own. All you have to do is sneak into the linen closet, take out the best quality possibly you can find of the white flannel pillowcase. It's going to really irritate the crap out of your family. Staple it to an old broom handle. And then what you do is you want to drag this in an area of your yard where you suspect you have ticks. So you take 10 steps just about, and you stop, turn it over, and then you stand there and stare at it until the neighbors think you've absolutely gone nuts. And then suddenly you'll see things start to move. And sometimes they're not ticks, but one of the most hair-raising experiences you can have is to see what looks like a little pile of dust suddenly start to disperse. Better than the Sci-Fi Channel any day. And those are the larval ticks. But anyway, there's some questions you want to ask yourself before you start to go out to scout for the ticks. And I guess I haven't gotten to that yet. But anyway, with repellents, what did I do? Okay, I'll go back to that one. Hold on a second. All right, anyway. What you want to do is you want to ask yourself if there are areas that the deer are trafficking in your yard, if there's an area that's high traffic for humans or animals, or if there's another area that might harbor rodents. And those are the places to start when you're scouting for ticks. So let's talk a little bit about repellents again. We did talk about this before, but remember, Deet does not do much. Permethrin, which is what this is actually a pesticide. The permethrin product should never ever go on your skin. This is to treat your clothing and your gear, and you want to wait until it's dry before you go out into the field. When you are applying this, make sure your kitty cats are not in the area, because sometimes cats will have a bad reaction to this, and this should always be applied outside, never indoors in an enclosed space. Now you can buy clothing that is permeated with this, and it's good for so many washings. A lot of different companies sell it. REI is an example of one of the companies that sell permethrin treated clothing. But anyway, that's a way to help to keep ticks off of you as well. Botanicals, unfortunately, will provide little, if any, protection. There hasn't been a lot of scientific testing done, but if you see tips on the internet about stuffing your pockets with lavender dryer sheets, yeah, you'll smell nice, but you cannot depend on that to protect you against disease. It's really not going to give you a huge amount, if any, protection at all. Okay, so cats can have a sensitivity. We already talked about that. Oh, one thing that you can do too is, you know how you get the little terry cloth sweatbands? We have a colleague that will use this product on the sweatbands, and he'll put them around his wrists and ankles, and that can also help you protect you from the ticks, either climbing onto your hands and then going upwards, or climbing onto your ankles and going upwards. You can also wrap pieces of tape backwards so the sticky side is out, and put them above your boots or your socks when you're out in the field. Okay, so looking for and reducing ticks in the landscape, there's that slide I was looking for, so I already talked about that, and that's how to make the tick check. One of the things you want to do is when you go out and you're flagging for ticks, you want to do it when the sun is out and it's fairly dry, because they won't be active when it's cold, and they won't be active in the rain. But when you have a nice, dry, sunny morning, about 10 o'clock, something like that, that's probably a good idea. And if you get 5 to 10 adults or nymphs, then you have a hot spot. A lot of times people are treating for ticks, they cover their whole yard every day, or not every day, every week with a treatment. That's really not terribly effective to do that. Reducing ticks in the landscape, again, remember that ticks have an absolute requirement for moisture. So if you're over irrigating your landscape, that's going to lend itself to ticks. If you have a lot of 18-inch high grasses and things right at the interface between the woods and your yard, that may also increase your tick, and so will ground covers. In some cases, they have found that for black-legged or deer ticks, if you have them, you can provide a 3-foot wide wood chip barrier over plastic sheeting between your yard and the woods. That's going to help you for the dog tick and the deer ticks, but not so much for the lone stars, because the lone stars don't care. Okay, we're almost at the end. We're going to answer some top tick myths. How many people say ticks jump? Nah, they don't have jumping legs. Fleas have jumping legs, but ticks are crawlers. They kind of waddle along, and they can boogie. They can waddle quite quickly. Myth number 2, ticks fall from trees. No, they walk upwards really, really quickly. Okay, myth number 3, chiggers cause all those little itchy red bumps all over your feet and legs in the summer on Long Island. Nope, not that we found anyway. Myth number 4, if you touch a match to a tick, it will back out of your skin. Pyros. Petroleum jelly or fingernail polish will cause the tick to back out. That's right, you guys got it. Okay, number 5, all ticks are infected with some kind of disease. How many people say yes? How many people say no? Okay, no, that's correct. Myth number 6, Deet and natural botanicals provide protection against ticks. No, that's correct. Okay. All right. Myth number 7, those tiny bright red things that crawl over warm cement in June are baby ticks. What are they? Clover mites. Clover mites. And they want to be big. They want to be bad, but all you have to do is go, and they're done. They'll leave a red stain, though, so if you're wearing light-colored clothing, be aware of that. Lyme disease always produces a bullseye rash. That's right. Okay. Number 9. Ticks can fly. So can pigs. No, they don't have wings. Only insects have wings. Number 10. Most ticks on Long Island are deer ticks. How many people say yes? How many people say no? What's the most common tick on Long Island? Lonestar ticks. Very good. Okay. All ticks carry Lyme disease. No. And the last one. You can always feel a tick crawling on you or biting you. No, you can't. So, all right. So what you want to do then, okay, go back to the pre-workshop questions. What you want to do is just, like I said, be always very cognizant when you've been in an area where there may be ticks, or even if you're in an area where you've never encountered ticks before, that doesn't mean you might not encounter them now, because the deer now are starting to move west. So hold on to your designer undies in Nassau County, because they're boogieing now towards the city. And as the deer move, so will the Lone Star ticks. So any questions I can help you with? No? I see people looking at the windows going, where the heck can I get out of this room? Anyway, there is literature up here. Please come and take it. Yes?
Could you explain, like, ticks being on you compared to biting you?
Yes. Ticks will crawl around, and they will look for a suitable place to engage their mouth parts, basically. And they love the cracks and crevices, warm areas like behind the knees, the armpits, or in the middle of your back where you can't reach them, and other unmentionable spaces. But they will crawl around for quite a long time if they can't find a suitable place. For example, my skin is always super dry, so the ticks usually wander around me for a long time going, oh my God, we're in the Sahara, before they find a place to bite, if they even do that. So hopefully, again, it's very important with your gear. When you first get in, throw your clothes in the dryer first, and then go check yourself right away. So the tick can wander around for quite a while before it puts its mouth parts in. And pets can bring you ticks too, because they're a nice little present. So, does that answer your question?
So I just wanted to clarify that, so when they're feeding on you,
Yeah.
they're attached.
When they're feeding on you, they're attached. And the longer they attach, they will actually make a kind of adhesive, which helps them to really stick to your skin. Plus, they've got those backwards facing barbs. So the longer they feed, the more difficult it's going to be to get them to disengage. And when they're finished feeding, they look like me after I've been to a golden corral or something like that. They blow up to about 300 times their size, and they will actually change color. They look like a bloated gray raisin a lot of the time. And you've probably all seen those when they've fallen off your pet and you go, what is that? And their legs get really, really small. After the female lays her eggs, which can be up to 3,000 in one sitting, she wants a big bar of chocolate and then she dies. So they lay their eggs underneath the leaf litter, and then the following year, those eggs are going to hatch out. And sometimes they can go a year and then lay their eggs the next year. So people ask, well, will the cold and snow kill the ticks? The answer is no, because snow is a good insulator, and for cold, they burrow underneath that leaf litter, which helps to insulate them. Other questions?
Tammy, how long will a tick survive?
A tick will survive after you've taken on, you put it in a jar, or?
Yeah, well, obviously the thing it's doing is trying to find
Right.
the host.
Yeah.
After it gets its blood, it dies. But between the time that it, starts trying to find a host until, when does it die?
Usually after 2 to 3 years, the tick will die, even if it doesn't find a host, it will die. And after it finds a host, then it will die. So the tick can survive anywhere from 1 to 3 years. If you bring the tick inside and want to put it in a jar or something, then it depends on how you are holding on to it. You can put it in the freezer for 24 hours, chances are it'll come back to life.
Yeah.
If you put it in for a few weeks, chances are it'll die. Just leave it in a jar on your desk. Depending on how hot it is, it can survive for several weeks or up to a month. Still wandering around.
So you have to be careful if you've got clothes on that you went somewhere. Don't
Precisely.
throw them on your bed.
No.
Don't put them in your house somewhere and say the tick will die
Yes.
because it doesn't have anything to eat. It's still waiting there
Throw them in,
for up to 3
right.
years.
That's right, yeah. Throw them in dry. Usually they won't survive as long in the house because it's hot and dry in the house, but outdoors they can survive up to 3 years. But again, bag everything up. When you get home, throw stuff in the dryer. If it is not dryer safe, say you have something you can't throw in the dryer, that's when you bag it up and you can solarize the piece. Either leave it in your car where it gets nice and hot to try to kill the ticks, or you can leave it outside so the heat builds up and kills off the ticks. But really the dryer is your best bet.
Which tick gives the bullseye, or do they all give a
A
bullseye?
lot of the different diseases can produce a bullseye or a rash. The bullseye, the concentric circles, is usually associated with Lyme disease, but many times the person does not develop that. So you can't really use that as a definitive thing. Anytime you have a rash, though, after a tick's bitten you, you want to go to the doctor, because it could just be your immune system. Because the problem with Lone Stars is that they have a very irritating saliva, so you're likely to develop a big bump or a long-lasting bump, more so with them than the other ticks. But if it looks like it's got concentric circles, that's really, get there as soon as possible. It may not be Lyme disease, but there's something going on.
If you mow the lawn low, that protects your kids against the ticks?
Probably not, because Lone Star ticks in particular are adapted better to hot, dry conditions than the other ticks, but they will still, if you had mowed your lawn low and you were irrigating like crazy, which you probably have to if you mowed it low, the ticks are still going to come across that area. What you want to watch out for is the border of the woods. If you've got grass or plants that are about that high, that's where they're going to hang out and quest. But again, you can scout to see if you're there. What you really want to do is watch out for play areas, because a lot of times people will put the swing sets and stuff in the corner in the shade where it's close to the woods, or if you've got a sandbox and you've got stuff, shrubs and stuff around there, that's where you're likely
They're
to
not usually in the lawn, they're usually in the higher stuff.
Usually they're in the higher stuff, but the Lone Star will get into the lawn. But even mowing the lawn lower, the Lone Star are still going to get in
But
the
the
lawn.
deer ticks don't usually bother the lawn.
Ear ticks are not as likely to be in the lawn unless it's over irrigated, because they need that moisture. They need to be able to go up and down the vegetation and take their coffee break in the leaf litter. That's not to say you won't find them there, but they're likely to be within a very short distance of the shade.
And how about bushes that are taller than 18 inches?
If the bushes are taller than 18 inches, you may find them questing on the lower part of the shrub, and that's where that white tick checking flag is going to be your best friend, because you can staple that to a broom handle, and rather than dragging it on the turf, you can poke it into the shrubs and then pull it out and see what you get.
So usually questing in the 18-inch area.
The 18-inch area, yes. They don't climb particularly high. That's, I know, and a lot of people feel like they're dropping off of things, but that's not typical. Other questions? Yeah.
Do you know if it's true that if you don't take antibiotics within a month of getting Lyme disease, that it's hard to get rid of?
It is harder to get rid of. And the reason for this is that the organism will find areas in your body where it can hide from your bloodstream. And this would be places like your joint capsules, your neurological tissue, because many drugs can't cross the blood-brain barrier, but this organism can. And you can also end up with damage to your heart. So that's why if you have a suspicion that you have a tick-borne disease, no matter what kind it is, it's best to go to the doctor if they want to give you medication. If you are fairly sure and they're fairly sure that you have the disease, then you should take the medicine. Now, if it's one of those things where they have no idea and they're just going to put you on just in case, then you kind of have to go with your own personal philosophy for taking medication. But if you develop any kinds of signs or symptoms, think about it. It's really easy to forget because we're exposed to all kinds of things, especially in a public setting like a school. And they say, I get a cold, I get a flu, whatever. But that's why you write it in your calendar, break or whatever. And like, okay, yeah, maybe I had the flu, but I was exposed here, so maybe I should come back. Does that answer your question? Any other questions? No? All right. Is everybody itchy?
Yes.
Let's get skeeved out? Yeah, good. I've done a good job. All right. If we can help you out with anything, please feel free to contact us at Cornell Cooperative Extension